So Romeo and Juliet begins with a big old spoiler. Just 6 lines into the play, we learn that a pair of star-crossed lovers will take their life. And this doesn't just tell us what's going to happen, it introduces us to one of the major themes. Right away, we have love and death occupying the same place. Lovers will take their own life. They do this within the context of an ancient grudge between their families. Notably, we never learn why these two families hate each other. The hate that the Montagues and Capulets have for each other exists as part of the setting. It is the initial condition of the play. Moreover, in this prologue, we learn that their death will bury their parents' strife. So their love leads to their death, and their death ends the discord between their parents. Their death transforms that initial condition. It changes the setting. Through their death, Verona will move from a space of hate to a space of love. Or, to put this more poetically, this transformation will happen with the fearful passage of their death-marked love. Sometimes you just need to pause and wonder at the beautiful efficiency of Shakespeare's language. Death-marked love. It says it all. So I think it's pretty clear that Shakespeare wants us to draw some connections between love and death from the very start of this play, and who am I to question the bard? So that's how we're going to start off this series on Romeo and Juliet. We're going to investigate the connections between love and death in Act 1. And if this sounds like it's your kind of thing, please consider subscribing, and we can do more of that together. Okay, before this play equates love and death, it's going to first equate sex with violence. It opens with some men who serve the Capulet house bantering about how tough they are. The two serving men talk about how they'll be quick to fight any Montagues, and as part of this masculine chest beating, one of them says that when I have fought with the men, I will be civil with the maids. I will cut off their heads. He then explains his joke, the heads of the maidens, or their maiden heads. He'll either chop off their heads, or he'll take their virginity. And the implication is that this will be done by force. Yep, Romeo and Juliet begins with a joke about SA. The Verona of this play is a patriarchal and autocratic society. If these serving men get told to do something, they have to do it. In fact, in the very first line of Act 1, Scene 1, the first line of this play, it's one worker complaining to another, "On my word, will not carry coals." It sounds like his boss told him to do something degrading, and he's thinking about standing up for himself. He knows he can't, though. So instead, the conversation moves from expressing anger at his boss, Capulet, to expressing his anger in a way that his boss will approve of. Fighting the Montagues. These are men who don't have many ways to assert their own dignity in the world, so the ancient grudge between Montague and Capulet gives them a framework to prove their value in this world, a place for their bruised masculinity to prove itself. In this way, we can actually interpret the hatred that they feel towards the Montagues as an expression of self-love. They need to feel important somewhere, and this attempt to love themselves manifests in hatred for another. They need to feel like men who have control of their lives in some capacity, and since they can't rebel against Capulet, the way that they express this desire is to assault Montague women, a population with even less power. And so, love and hate and sex and violence all get tossed together in these opening lines. But on with the scene. The Montague serving men pass by, the Capulet serving men bite their thumb, and everybody fights. Eventually, Benvolio will see this, and he enters the scene speaking the first lines of verse that we've heard since the prologue. "Put up your swords, you know not what you do." He attempts to bring order to the scene with a line of perfect iambic pentameter. "You know not what you do." Did he just paraphrase Jesus? Either way, this beautiful line of verse doesn't work. Tybalt shows up, followed by the patriarchs, Lord Montague and Lord Capulet. The two old men want to fight, but can't. When Capulet says, "Give me my long sword," Lady Capulet says, a crutch, why call you for a sword?" The old men are too old to fight in this old fight. My point here, if I have one, is that the hatred between Montague and Capulet needs to be performed by a younger generation who don't even know why they're fighting. This opening fight makes the ancient grudge real. It puts the old hate in the present tense. It sets the scene. If you are part of Team Capulet, an essential part of your identity is to hate Team Montague. A love of Capulet manifests in a desire to bring death to Montague. And where was Romeo in all of this? We find out from Benvolio, who has already established himself as a reliable narrator, that Romeo is walking alone in the woods. Apparently, he's depressed, and those who care about him are worried. Notably, we will learn about both our protagonists, Romeo and Juliet, from other people before they are permitted to speak for themselves. Benvolio tells us about Romeo, and Daddy Capulet is going to tell us about Juliet later. This is important because it establishes that these two lovers exist within a network of relationships. They do not exist as individuals first. They exist as sons and daughters and friends and cousins, Montagues and Capulets. Eventually, Romeo will enter this play, already in love and sad about it. He says, "What sadness lengthens Romeo's hours, not having that which having makes them short." He can't have the woman that he loves because the woman that he loves is somebody who has rejected him. Notably, he doesn't say who that is. Romeo then sees the residue of the fight and reflects on the relationship between love and hate. He sees that people have fought for their love of the two households, but that love expressed itself through fighting and hatred. Here's much to do with hate, but more with love. Why then, O brawling love, O loving hate, O anything of nothing first create? O heaven lightness, serious vanity, misshapen chaos of well-seeming forms, feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire, sick health, still waking sleep that is not what it is. These are just some of the many oxymorons and paradoxes this play introduces us to. Feather of lead, bright smoke, cold fire. Later, Juliet will say that her only love sprung from her only hate. It's a play built on these contradictions. But more of that when we discuss language in Act 3. For now, let's move on to Act 1, Scene 2, where we first learn about Juliet. Capulet tells us that she might not be ready to marry because she's only 13 years old. That's the first thing that we learn about Juliet, that she's 13. And Paris responds, "Younger than she are happy mother's maid." And it's not a very good argument. Her father says that Paris should win her heart, and that consent is important. For now. He says that consent is important now, in Act 1. He's not going to hold that line, though. When they leave the scene, Benvolio and Romeo enter and continue to link love with violent metaphors. For example, Benvolio advises Romeo that one fire burns out another's burning, linking love to a fire that consumes. Love and fire will continue to be closely connected in this act. But there are other metaphors employed here. Benvolio tells Romeo to take thou some new infection to thy eye, and the rank poison of the old will die. And Romeo says that he is shut up in prison, kept without my food, whipped and tormented. They make love sound like death. It's an infection, a poison, a prison. It's starvation. This is how they talk about love. Sounds great. But this joy fest is interrupted by a serving man who cannot read the invitation list for the Capulet party that night. This is how Romeo finds out about the party, and this is how we find out that Romeo is not in love with Juliet. He's in love with Rosaline, Juliet's cousin. Benvolio will insist that they go to the party so that Romeo can compare Rosaline to other women and see that she is nothing special. Remember, one fire will put out another's burning. And that takes us to Scene 3, where we finally see Juliet and she can speak for herself. Kind of. Her two mother figures are not going to really let her talk, but she is there on stage. Lady Capulet in this scene proves pretty quickly that she doesn't really know what to do as a mother. She doesn't even call for Juliet herself. She has the nurse call for her instead. And then she dismisses the nurse, only to have the nurse be immediately called back in when she realizes that she doesn't know how to have a conversation with her daughter. The nurse proceeds to tell the same story about Juliet 3 times. It's enough to annoy everyone, but particularly Lady Capulet. So I guess we need to discuss what that story is, since it again connects sex with violence. Apparently, when Juliet was almost 3 years old, she fell forward and hurt her forehead. The nurse's husband then said, "Dost thou fall upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backward when thou hast more wit. Wilt thou not, Jule?" The joke, which isn't very funny at all, is that when she's older, she'll fall on her back, ready for missionary position sex, rather than fall forward and hurt her pretty little face. That's the joke. So at the exact moment that her mother is about to tell Juliet that a bunch of adult men have been talking behind her back about whether or not she is ready for marriage and childbearing at the age of 13, we find out that a bunch of adults have actually been sexualizing her since the moment she could literally walk. When Lady Capulet finally takes control of the conversation again, she asks Juliet how she feels about marriage, and Juliet says that it's an honor that I dream not of. She neither gives consent nor refuses it. She's 13. She's not dreaming of marriage or motherhood at all. Lady Capulet then says that the upper-class women of Juliet's age could already be married and offers herself as proof that somebody so young could be a mother, even though it is very clear that she is still uncomfortable with the position of mother and isn't particularly good at it. Juliet says that she'll consider it, and that takes us on to scene 4, where Romeo runs around with his friends. Notably, the transition between these scenes highlights the difference in their lives. Juliet is confined to the house, while Romeo runs around with his bros. That said, both are being told who and how they should love. Lady Capulet and the nurse tell Juliet that she should look to love Paris, while Benvolio and Mercutio have a lot of opinions about who and how Romeo should be loving. Also, it's good to note that we learn a lot about Juliet's relationship with her family. We get stories from her childhood, and we get nothing like that for Romeo. All we learn about Romeo is the way that he acts in the present moment, and at the present moment, he's like the worst. Even hanging out with his friends, on the way to a party, Romeo will find a way to be a downer. He says that he's not going to be very much fun tonight, so they may as well let him hold the torch so everybody else can have fun. I am not for this ambling, being but heavy, I will bear the light. And this nonsense provokes Mercutio's first lines in the play. When Romeo says that his soul is led, Mercutio responds, "You are a lover. Borrow Cupid's wings and soar with them above a common bound. Love doesn't need to be a prison. It can be a set of wings. Finally, somebody compares love to something better than an infection." That said, Mercutio is much more cynical than Romeo. Romeo is sad because he has an idealized view of love, and Rosaline doesn't love him back. Romeo believes love has a lot of weight, that it's important. Many of his metaphors compare love to something heavy, his lead soul, for example. He says that under love's heavy burden do I sink. But Mercutio thinks that love is light. He responds, "And to sink in it, you should burden love, too great an oppression for a tender thing." Mercutio does not find love so important. It's light, it's tender. Don't take it so seriously. Don't let it get to you. But Romeo says that it's not tender. It's rough. So Mercutio responds, "If love be rough with you, be rough with love," bringing us back to the relationship between love and violence or death. For Romeo, love is something that can dominate him, kill him. For Mercutio, love is a site of domination. He can be rough with his love. That said, this scene, of course, is most famous for Mercutio's Queen Mab speech. When Romeo says that he has a dream, that it's not wise to go to the party, and that he believes his dream is truth, Mercutio responds with Queen Mab. Mercutio's name is clearly derived from the god Mercury, the messenger, the person who bridges the gap between gods and men. In this play, Mercutio is very much a bridge character. He is neither Montague nor Capulet. He's the only one that's actually invited to this party, but he attends with those who are uninvited. This play has many paradoxes, as I've already noted. Feather of lead, bright smoke, love and death, and so on. Mercutio in many ways embodies the bridge between those contradictions. He is the space between. In the Queen Mab speech, Mercutio starts by saying that Queen Mab influences dreams by reflecting what people want to see. Lovers dream of love, lawyers dream of fees, ladies dream of kisses, and so on. But the kisses bring blisters. The soldier's dream of victory comes paired with death and destruction. The love of a Capulet brings the death to Montagues. There is always a shadow side to desire. And Mercutio draws attention to that relationship between the dream world of our desires and the realization of those dreams in reality. Romeo lives in an idealized world of love, and Mercutio, along with Queen Mab, attempt to show him that real life cannot be idealized. There are always shadows. There's always a consequence. Even if Romeo achieves his desire to find requited love, there will be darkness that comes with it. We know that. The prologue told us that that will happen. Mercutio is the bridge between fantasy and reality. This speech, much like the entire play, starts off comedic, but it'll end tragic. There's always a shadow. Which brings us to the final scene of this act, the scene where Romeo actually meets Juliet. And when he first sees her, he forgets about his love for Rosaline right away. Benvolio was right. One fire puts out another's burning. Literally. Romeo says of Juliet that she doth teach the torches to burn bright. For him, she is the brightest thing in the room, and he's consumed by a different fire. It's notable that we never really get a visual description of Juliet. We don't know if she's tall or short, blonde or brunette. In the source material for this play, she's described as blonde, but Shakespeare will never give us that kind of description. The only word used to describe Juliet's physical appearance is fair. She's described as a rich jewel in an Ethiop's ear and a snowy dove trooping with crows. And it's important to recognize the racialized language here. The word fair refers to her paleness, and as Kim F. Hall and many others have noted, fair is also a synonym for beauty in these plays. And it would be irresponsible to move past these lines without calling attention to the way that it positions whiteness as beautiful by contrasting it with blackness. It is complicit in the construction of beauty standards that promote whiteness as superior to blackness, and all the imperialist implications of that construction. I have an entire video about how Shakespeare participates in and sometimes disrupts these narratives of blackness at the dawn of British imperialism and his participation in the slave trade. You can watch that video, or even better, you can just read Kim F. Hall's book, Things of Darkness, or Farrah Karim-Cooper's book, The Great White Bard, How to Love Shakespeare While Talking About Race, which has an entire chapter about Romeo and Juliet, and it is much better than anything that I can write. So for now, let's move on to the first meeting between our protagonists. When they first meet, they speak a perfect sonnet together. A sonnet is a 14-line poem. These poems are often broken into 3 different 4-line chunks. Fancy poetry scholars will call these 4-line chunks quatrains. These 3 quatrains are then followed by a rhyming pair of lines at the end, which is a rhyming couplet. In this case, Romeo speaks the first quatrain with a perfect A-B-A-B rhyme scheme. If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this. My lips, 2 blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. In that first quatrain, he establishes the central metaphor. He is a pilgrim, and she is a holy shrine. His hand is rough, but his lips are tender. Notice he's using the same words from his earlier conversation with Mercutio: rough touch, tender kiss. Juliet then continues the sonnet. She's able to match his energy and his wordplay. She matches his rhyme scheme. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. She continues the metaphor and expands on it, becoming a saint and turning the classical hand gesture of a prayer into a holy palmer's kiss. And then the third quatrain shows us just how in sync they are. They share these 4 lines. Romeo says, "Have not saints lips and holy palmers too?" which seems a little forward to me, but it's a very clever expansion of the metaphor. If she's now a saint, then she also has lips. And so she says, "I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer." She plays it coy. Those lips aren't for kissing, they're for praying, and Romeo recognizes the opportunity here. If the palms can kiss in prayer, then so can the lips. So he says, "O then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair." Notice the rhyme scheme of those 4 lines together. Also notice how he cleverly continues the metaphor. They're speaking poetry together. And if this is going to be an English sonnet, then it needs to end with a couplet, 2 rhyming lines in a row. Juliet responds, "Saints do not move, thou grant for prayer's sake." In other words, if he tries to kiss her, she won't move. So Romeo takes the opportunity. "Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take." And that completes both the metaphor and the sonnet, and it's capped off with a kiss. Just an incredible scene. The form of the language matches the function of the scene. It's an insane bit of writing and storytelling. It turns out that Shakespeare is famous for a reason. And that sonnet flirtation is so fun that they just start another one right away. This time even more in sync. They're finishing each other's lines. But they're interrupted this time by the nurse. As the party breaks up, Juliet asks the nurse who the boy was who wasn't dancing. Juliet says, "If he be married, my grave is like to be my wedding bed," in a terrible bit of foreshadowing, which once again links love and death. A grave as a wedding bed, her only love sprung from her only hate. Her grave will be her wedding bed because her union with Romeo will only be possible in death. Given that the setting presupposes a hatred between their two families, they can only love outside the gaze of society. And since there is no escape from society, they exist within a network of relationships before they even existed as individuals, they cannot be seen together. Romeo and Juliet will only ever meet on stage 5 times in this play, and only one of those times is going to be in daylight. They will not be able to love each other in daylight, in life, so they will have to love each other in darkness, in death. So love and death are once again positioned in opposition to each other, but we know from the start that ultimately the two will be fused together. For Romeo, the desire for Juliet is the desire to be consumed by a fire. For Juliet, the desire for Romeo is a desire to destroy her identity as an object of exchange between men. They both want to self-destruct and be reborn in love. This is the very Mab who gallops night by night through lovers' brains. The path to reciprocal love is through self-destruction. This act began with some servants fighting, establishing an ancient rivalry as the setting for this play. Those men found their identity and dignity in the performance of that ancient grudge. It gave them purpose. People depended on the rivalry because they can only understand their worth while they're operating within it. This same setting prohibits Romeo from being in love with Juliet. They cannot be together in this city because it defines itself by its hatreds. Our two protagonists want to define themselves with their love, and their love will be a rebellion against the power structures and narratives of Verona. And that will be the topic of our next video, authority and resistance. Please subscribe to be notified when it's published, and thank you for watching.